Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're investigating one of the most persistent conspiracy theories in music history. The claim that Paul McCartney, one of the Fab Four, died in a car crash in 1966 and was secretly replaced by a lookalike. The man who took his place? A mysterious figure known as Faul, or Fake Paul. It all allegedly began on November 9, 1966. According to the theory, Paul McCartney was involved in a fatal car crash after a late-night argument with his bandmates. Supposedly, the crash was so severe that his body was unrecognizable. But rather than letting the world know that one of the biggest stars in music had died, the story goes that the Beatles' management decided to cover it up. They held a secret contest to find a lookalike to replace Paul, someone who could sing, play the bass, and fool the public. And so the legend of Faul was born. This replacement, some claim, was a man named William Shears Campbell, a Scottish musician who had won the contest. But how could the Beatles pull off such an elaborate hoax? And more importantly, did they leave us clues about Paul's alleged death? The clues hidden in plain sight. Believers in the Paul is dead theory point to dozens of so-called clues hidden in the Beatles' music and album artwork. Let's start with one of the most famous examples, the cover of Abbey Road. The iconic Abbey Road album cover showing the Beatles walking across the street. On this cover, conspiracy theorists argue that the four Beatles represent a funeral procession. John, dressed in white, represents a priest. Ringo, in black, symbolizes the undertaker. George, in denim, represents the gravedigger. And Paul? He's walking barefoot, an old symbol of death, and out of step with the others, suggesting he's the corpse. Not convinced yet? Take a look at Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Some say the album is filled with clues hinting at Paul's death. The most famous is the band's lineup on the cover. Paul is holding a black instrument, while everyone else is holding something colorful. Some fans claim this represents mourning. And what about the flowers arranged in the shape of a bass guitar in front of the group? Does it resemble a gravesite? Then, of course, there are the supposed audio clues. Fans who played the Beatles' songs backwards found eerie messages. In Revolution 9, playing the track in reverse reportedly reveals the phrase, "Turn me on, dead man." If Paul really was replaced, how did they pull off the switch without anyone noticing? Believers claim that Faul, the fake Paul, doesn't look exactly the same as the original. They point to differences in facial structure, like his ears, his teeth, and even his height. Some have even compared voice patterns, claiming that the voice of Paul McCartney after 1966 isn't quite the same as before. There are interviews where Paul, or Faul, gets visibly uncomfortable when asked about this conspiracy. Could it be that he's hiding something? Or is it just frustration with a decades-old rumor? Before Paul's alleged death in 1966, it was clear that the Beatles had a natural hierarchy. John Lennon and Paul McCartney were the creative powerhouses, the primary songwriters, and the undeniable leaders of the group. While George Harrison contributed significantly, and Ringo Starr was beloved for his humor and drumming, they often played more supportive roles behind John and Paul's spotlight. Paul, in particular, was seen as a perfectionist, known for taking charge during recording sessions and guiding the band's musical direction. This often put him at the forefront of their creative decisions. But after the alleged car crash and Paul's replacement by Faul, some fans noticed a curious shift in the band's dynamic, particularly with Ringo Starr. Previously seen as the quiet, affable member of the group, Ringo's demeanour supposedly became more cocky and outspoken, especially around the new Paul. Ringo, who had always been the easygoing and humorous underdog of the band, began to show a more assertive and self-assured side. Some conspiracy theorists suggest that Ringo, once living in the shadow of the powerful McCartney-Lennon leadership, felt a shift in power dynamics with the introduction of Faul. Some believe that Ringo's increased confidence was a reaction to the new Paul, whom he may have viewed as less dominant or authoritative compared to the original McCartney. Perhaps Ringo, who had been the quiet drummer in the background, saw this as an opportunity to step out and assert more of his personality, especially if the band itself was trying to adjust to a new internal chemistry. Interestingly, Ringo was known for being more light-hearted and laid back around the original Paul. But around Faul, his jokes and playful demeanor became sharper, even a little more challenging. Could this have been Ringo testing the waters with the replacement Paul? Or was it just a natural evolution in their friendship as the band matured? Of course, like most conspiracy theories, the Paul is dead theory has plenty of holes. For one, the Beatles themselves have repeatedly denied the rumors. In fact, they've even poked fun at the idea. Paul McCartney himself has laughed it off, calling it the rumor that won't die. Experts also point out that many of the so-called clues are just coincidences or clever interpretations of artistic choices. It's not uncommon for people to find meaning where there is none, especially in the work of a band as iconic and influential as the Beatles. And while facial comparisons have been made, technology wasn't as advanced back then, so even slight changes in appearance could be due to natural aging, rather than a complete switch. So if there's no solid evidence, why do people still believe Paul McCartney is dead? The Beatles were one of the most famous and beloved bands in history. A secret like this, if it were true, would completely reshape how we see pop culture. And that's a fascinating thought. But the legend of Faul lives on, capturing the imaginations of Beatles fans and conspiracy theorists alike. Whether it's all just a wild hoax or there's a grain of truth buried somewhere in the mystery, it's a story that keeps people talking, even after all these years. What do you think? Do your own research. There is a lot of coverage out there addressing this conspiracy theory. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. Until next time, stay curious.